Hello, my name's Raye Anderson and I write murder mysteries in the Roxanne Calloway series. The first book is called And We Shall Have Snow. And the second book, which is the one I'm going to read from, is And Then Is Heard No More. Roxanne Calloway is a sergeant at this point in the RCMP. And at the beginning of this book, Margot Wishart and Roberta Axelson, who appear in the first book, are on their way into Winnipeg to attend the opening night of the season at the Prairie Theatre Centre. So we're going to start there, and then I'll fill you in on the next two bits. Prairie Theatre Centre was housed in a custom-built grey concrete slab. It was faced with Tyndall stone, a local limestone studded with marine fossils that reminded the people of Winnipeg and its surroundings that the land they lived on was an ancient lake bed. The building had no windows on the street side and resembled a bunker, but bright lights beamed from the front doors. Margot was relieved to see people still standing around talking, drinks in hand, in the lobby. The audience hadn't gone in yet. The house manager, elegant in a tailored suit and bow tie, caught her eye as they handed over their tickets. Dr. Wishart, he greeted her. Margot had been introduced to him. Just 2 days before, she couldn't remember his name, but was glad to spot the name badge on his lapel. Hello, James. We got here just in time. You're in luck. He wore a professional smile. We're delayed. You've got time to run upstairs for a quick drink. He indicated a doorway to the right. Private reception, Friends of PTC, said a sign on a stand beside it. The room at the top of the flight of the stairs glittered with celebrities. Margot surveyed the crowd. She recognized the mayor and a couple of well-known politicians, a local magnate who donated generously to the arts. A well-known CBC personality was chatting to the theatre's marketing director. Roberta spotted the food table and made a beeline for it, helping herself to a glass of wine en route. Up here, in this privileged area, it came free. Margot was driving, no wine for her tonight. Professor Tom Dick waved a hand. Tom was a colleague. He ran the theatre department at the university and had introduced her to the PTC staff. He was also on PTC's board of directors. Glad you could make it, he said. They're running late tonight, it's not like them. They watched as Tamsin Longstaff, PTC's general manager, detached herself from a group of donors and went to talk to James, the house manager, who was hovering at the door. They left together. They can't find Gerald, Tom exclaimed. That's the reason for the hold-up. He always opens the show. Gerald Blaze had been artistic director at PTC for over 20 years. It was his habit to stroll onto the stage on each opening night, affability oozing from every pore, and welcome the audience to his house. He's never missed, not once, and this is the season opener. Hasn't been seen all day. They haven't a clue where he's got to. So, opening night happens without Gerald Blaze, the artistic director, and in chapter 2, concern mounts as to what has happened to him. And we meet Budgie. Budgie is his wife, Annabelle Torrance. She's called Budgie in the theatre business. And Budgie is in a play. She's an actor and she's in Regina. She's been performing the night before. She wasn't at opening night. And she's in her hotel room in the morning. Budgie Torrance opened her eyes and peered at the bedside clock. 1:14. She'd gone out after the show last night with some of the cast and crew. Late night Italian food and a couple of drinks, then back to the hotel. Thick drapes kept the room dark, and she'd hung the Do Not Disturb sign on her door. She switched on a light, pulled over some extra pillows, reached for her phone, then glanced through her messages. Gerald still hadn't shown up. There was one from Tamsin. The board was asking awkward questions. Was she sure Gerald was okay, that he'd be back in time to start rehearsals on Tuesday? Another was from Toby Mallison. Toby is the marketing director. WTF, Budgie, the free press and radio stations are asking where G is. What do I say? Another, from Larry Smith, the caretaker at their condo in Winnipeg, complained that Gerald hadn't said he was going away. The cats had been meowing loudly, so Larry had gone in to check. They were hungry. Gerald hadn't left food and litter for them, and he hadn't arranged with Larry to have them fed. That made her swing her legs out of her bed and sit up straight. Gerald might have taken off in a snit, but not take care of his cats? Never. She padded to the washroom, then she looked at herself in the mirror. She hadn't taken off her makeup last night before she fell into bed. She looked like an aging raccoon. She put a coffee pod into the machine and pressed the start button. Had she got it wrong? Was Gerald really in some kind of a fix? She'd been so sure. She always knew when Gerald had a new conquest in the sights. She could see him start to preen. Sure sign, took more trouble than usual over what he wore, brushed his hair a lot, had a certain gleam in his eye. She didn't mind, she was used to it. It was kind of cute. Funny almost. They'd agreed years ago they would pursue their own arbitrary interests. It worked for them. She had her own fun. They gave each other some slack. They'd been married close to 30 years. They had each other figured out. The kid from the university, she was pretty sure it was her. She'd watched the two of them together in the kitchen at a party at Tom Dick's house a few weeks back. The girl all big-eyed and adoring. Him leaving it a bit too close was no big deal. The coffee was ready. She went to the little fridge where she kept supplies, found a carton of milk, poured some into her mug and stirred. She took a sip and sat at a small round table. Still, she thought. She and Gerald had had a row on the phone last weekend about Macbeth. She hadn't wanted him to direct it himself. Maybe she shouldn't have let him know that, but it was true. She'd wanted Nathan Simpkin to do it. Budgie was dying to work with him. Nathan was young and would bring some fresh new ideas to the production. She was sure of that, but no, Gerald wanted this job for himself. Same old. It was bad enough that he'd chosen Macbeth again, been there, done that. She was itching to have a go at one of those big roles that had been written for and about men. She'd be a great Richard III. But no, back to the lady, and it was going to be so old hat. He was yammering on about earth tones, organic shapes, all that old crap. She'd seen the designs. Lady Macbeth in medieval drapes. No, she had retorted, this will not do. She'd ranted on about how hackneyed it was, a cliche. She'd actually told him he was stupid. She's been married to Macbeth for maybe 20 years, she'd said. And in those days, girls got married off when they were 14. Budgie was the same age as her husband, but she could get away with looking like she was much younger with the right look and some flattering lighting. She's still mad about the guy. At least he'd had the sense to hire that cute Danny Foley to play Macbeth. That would help. But the nun-like headdress wrapped around her head would age her and make it more difficult to convince the audience that she was sexy. Gerald had gone huffy on her. He did that sometimes, tried to guilt her out, muttered about how she didn't share his vision. What vision, Gerald? She had replied, dripping acid. You haven't dreamed up an original concept in years. Maybe you never have. He'd hung up on her then. She hadn't cared. She'd have a quiet word with Sadie Williams, the costume designer. Sadie would get it. She was smart. She'd make sure Budgie looked presentable. So she hadn't been concerned about Gerald. Why would she? They'd had worse arguments before, way worse. He'd come around like he always did. But now he'd done a disappearing act. He hadn't done one of those in years before they even came to Manitoba, when the jobs he'd had were much more precarious and life was more stressful. He'd settled in comfortably to being AD at the Prairie Theatre Centre. His contract was coming up for renewal this year. Was he worried about that? She didn't know. She hadn't been around much to be able to pay attention. She'd been away most of the summer. At the Shaw Festival in Ontario, then here in Regina. She'd been in Winnipeg for a couple of weeks in August, but that was it. Gerald had never missed the opening of a play at PTC before, far less the one that opened the season. He loved openings, working the crowd, the festive atmosphere, the excitement. Nevertheless, it was possible. He'd have known that Tamsin and Toby were coming for him, and she, Budgie, wasn't around to stop him. But go off and neglect to make sure that Tarquin and Delilah weren't provided for? That didn't make sense. He adored those cats. Budgie looked at the bedside clock again. It was now 11:47. Winnipeg was an hour later than Regina. Gerald had been gone a day and a half. Should she call Tamsin and tell her to speak to the police? But what if he really was just off on some stupid dalliance and the press got hold of that? It would cause such an unnecessary scandal. She reached for the telephone and pressed the number for room service. She'd order breakfast first and have a shower. Then she'd make up her mind. So later that day, Margot has gone back to where she lives at Cullen Village, which is very like, if any of you have been to Dunnottar, it's very like Dunnottar. She has taken her other friend, Sasha Rosenberg, out for lunch. And they've decided to go to a place called The Locks, which may be very close to where I'm sitting right now. The Big Red River flowed north from Winnipeg, dammed before it entered the lake at its southernmost point. Locks at the side of the dam allowed boats to navigate their way to lower water, and the pool that formed at its foot was a great place to catch fish. Boats bobbed on the surface and pelicans gathered to scoop and dive into the water. Margot had brought along her camera. She might get some good shots. The cafe at the Locks had been a fixture for decades. Day trippers liked to drive out from the city along the scenic road by the river. They'd stop to eat and walk along the shore to watch the birds and the people fishing. This was a Friday and the kids were in school. It wasn't too busy. Margot and Sasha sat at a wooden picnic table in the warm fall sun and stuffed themselves on fried food. The dogs had their share too. A walk was definitely required before they headed home. They strolled to the Locks, the dogs on retractable leashes long enough that they could explore, Margot's camera slung around her neck. There were a few boats out on the water, and some people were fishing on each shore. Big white pelicans congregated on rocks that jutted out into the pool. Margot opened up her camera. "Here, give me that leash," said Sasha, taking it so that Margot's hands were free. The dogs were ambling along, sniffing out unfamiliar territory. Cars were parked on the roadside at a spot just past the dam. There was a paved pathway and a guardrail. From here you could get a good view. Margot watched a bird swoop into land on the water near others roosting on the rocks. She snapped it just as the webbed feet spread out to land and the big black-tipped wings spread to break its flight. She got a good shot. "Hey guys," she heard Sasha say. The dogs had wandered into a small parking lot, stretching their long leashes. They seemed to be interested in a shiny red Audi. Bob was straining to reach the back of the car, and Lenny was at the back fender trying to get his front paws up on it, sniffing at the trunk. "Leave that!" Sasha pulled on the leashes. They resisted. "Wonder if someone left their catch in the trunk." "Maybe," said Margot. She was more interested in watching another pelican hovering over the water as if it was ready to dive. Lenny doesn't go for dead fish." Sasha was walking towards the dogs, reeling in the leashes. "Unless it's rotten and he could roll in it." Margot got the shot she wanted, covered the lenses on her camera, and walked closer to take Bob's leash. "Someone could have been hunting," she said. "Maybe shot a deer." This was hunting season. Geese and deer were favourite targets. "Nice car," she commented. "Looks brand new." They pulled the dogs back onto the pathway and began to walk back to where Margot's Honda was parked in front of the cafe. "We've got time to get back to Cullen Village and take those two to the dog beach. They need to get some real exercise. Run off those wieners." The rest of that beautiful afternoon unfolded as it should. Towards its end, Sasha walked her hound back home and Margot put on the kettle in her house by the lakeshore. She took out her phone. It wasn't long past 4. There was still time to call Carla Hansen at the theatre. Carla hadn't seen her to thank her properly for giving her the complimentary tickets after the play ended. Carla answered. She was in the costume room cutting up fabric. "It's been a crazy afternoon," she said. "The police have been here. Tamsin finally called here about Gerald not showing up. They'd like us all to stop what we're doing and let them search everywhere, but we can't. Tamsin ended up yelling at a sergeant. We all heard her. Tamsin never yells. She must be really worried. Anyway, Gerald's definitely not been seen since he left after the dress rehearsal on Wednesday night. He must have walked out the back, towards the condo. There's no camera on the back door. Hardly anyone uses it. You know they live in that restored warehouse just across the back lane, him and Budgie?" Margot didn't. The police aren't saying anything, but a couple of our techies went over there this morning just to check in with the caretaker and see if he knew anything. He's been feeding the cats. His car's gone, so they're going to look for it. Shouldn't be hard to find. Budgie bought it for his 60th. An Audi, it's red. Margot was about to sip her tea. It didn't make it to her lips. I have to go, Carla, she said, already wondering who to call. See you Tuesday, and thanks again for the tickets. Margot hung up. She called Roberta Axelson. Roberta had Corporal Roxanne Calloway's cell phone number. She'd been given it by Roxanne in February when Roxanne was investigating that old murder case out of Fisker Bay, and it looked as if Roberta might be in danger. Margot would get the number from Roberta and call Roxanne directly. Roxanne was in the RCMP's Major Crimes Unit. She could take care of this. So, if you'd like to find out what happened to Gerald Blaze, and then is heard no more. And if you've read both of these books, there's a third one coming out in the spring. You're the first to know, and it's called Down Came the Rain, and it's back in the Interlake. So, thank you for listening, and happy reading.